The truth behind the veil. Why some married women are emotionally vulnerable. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Claire Matthews appeared to live the kind of life many women dreamed of. At 35, she had checked off most of the boxes society handed her as a young girl. She was married to David, her college sweetheart, and had been for over a decade. Together, they had two beautiful children, Ava, 9, and Luke, 6. Their home was nestled in a clean, family-friendly suburb just outside the city, a two-story house with blue shutters, a manicured lawn, and a backyard big enough for summer barbecues and inflatable pools. To outsiders, Claire was thriving. She had a part-time job she loved as a school counselor, which allowed her to balance work and family. She volunteered at the PTA, helped organize fundraisers, and was always on the front lines at school events, smiling with genuine warmth. Her Instagram was filled with color-coded lunchboxes, holiday family photos, and motivational quotes over latte art. But under that curated perfection was a growing ache, a silent, persistent void that she couldn't quite define. It didn't hurt like heartbreak or burn like rage. It was more subtle, like a soft hum of discontent that echoed through her days. She felt it when she folded laundry, alone in the quiet. She felt it when she watched romantic comedies and couldn't relate to the characters anymore. She felt it when she crawled into bed beside David and found herself instinctively turning away. David wasn't cruel, he wasn't abusive or neglectful. He provided for the family, kept the car running, paid bills on time, and mowed the lawn every Saturday. He showed up to parent-teacher conferences and took the kids to soccer games. By all accounts, he was a good husband. But somewhere along the way, their relationship had dulled into a gray routine. Their conversations revolved around logistics. Who was picking up the kids? What was for dinner? Which bill needed to be paid next? Physical intimacy had become scarce, more of an obligation than a connection. Claire couldn't remember the last time David looked at her with real interest, or the last time his touch made her feel desired rather than expected. She tried to convince herself this was just what marriage became. Everyone said the passion fades, that long-term relationships aren't about butterflies or sparks, but about stability, commitment, and trust. Claire told herself she should be grateful. So many women had it worse. But comparison did little to silence the yearning she felt every time she caught her reflection in the mirror and saw someone who used to dream, laugh, and glow, now moving through life like a ghost with a calendar. Then, one Thursday morning in early October, something shifted. The school was buzzing with the beginning of year energy. Claire was walking toward the staff lounge when she noticed a new face. He was tall, with chestnut hair and a warm smile, standing near the coffee machine. Their eyes met, and he extended a hand. "Hi, I'm Eric Sloan. I just joined the English department." Claire smiled, taking his hand. "Claire Matthews, counseling office. Welcome aboard." Eric's grip was firm, but not overbearing. His eyes held hers just a second longer than necessary, not inappropriately, but attentively. He had the kind of presence that made people feel seen, not scanned. As the day unfolded, Claire noticed him again in the break room, then again at the afternoon meeting. He asked thoughtful questions, made insightful comments, and laughed at her dry, under-the-breath jokes that most colleagues usually missed. The first time he complimented her, it caught her off guard. "New haircut?" he asked casually. "Looks really good on you." She chuckled, brushing it off. "You're the first to notice. Not even my husband said anything." Eric smiled, not in a flirtatious way, but in a way that acknowledged the comment's emotional weight. "Well, it suits you." That night, Claire found herself remembering that moment more than she intended to. It wasn't that she was attracted to Eric, at least, that's what she told herself. It was that she felt something unfamiliar. Not desire, but significance. In the days that followed, Eric's presence became a subtle undercurrent in her workday. She noticed how he often chose the seat next to her during faculty meetings, how he shared interesting articles with her, tailored to her counseling work, how his text messages, though always professional, carried a tone of warmth that felt personal. She told herself he was just friendly, that he treated everyone like this. But somewhere deep inside, a tiny door creaked open, the kind of door that led to thoughts she didn't want to admit she was having. The ache she had tried to suppress began to take form. It was no longer just a hum of dissatisfaction. It was a whisper that said, "You are more than this." Claire started paying more attention to her appearance before work. She wore a brighter shade of lipstick, took an extra 5 minutes with her hair, and wore the earrings David had given her 3 Christmases ago. She justified it as self-care, something every counselor should practice. But in truth, she was dressing for how Eric made her feel. One afternoon, as she and Eric walked to the parking lot after a long day, they stood beside her car, lingering. The conversation flowed easily. He asked about her college days. She asked about his transition to the school. When she mentioned the pressures of balancing motherhood and work, he responded not with platitudes, but with curiosity and empathy. "You must feel stretched thin sometimes," he said, his voice soft. She nodded, surprised by the sudden lump in her throat. "Most days, yeah, but it's what we do, right?" Eric tilted his head. "Doesn't mean it's fair." That moment, those simple words hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't validation. It was recognition. And for someone like Claire, who had been invisible in her own home for years, it felt dangerously close to affection. She began to crave their conversations. She checked her phone more frequently. She found herself crafting texts in her head and then deleting them. She wasn't being unfaithful. She hadn't done anything wrong. But something inside her had shifted. She was no longer numb, and that terrified her. One night, lying in bed beside David, who was already asleep, Claire stared at the ceiling. Her thoughts were loud, relentless. Why was she doing this? Why did Eric's words echo louder than her husband's silence? Why did she feel more alive at work than she did at home? She didn't have the answers, but she knew something had begun, something she wasn't sure she could stop. Claire wasn't looking to be desired. She was looking to be noticed. Not for her sacrifices, not for her role as a mother or wife, but for the person she still was beneath it all. And for the emotionally starved, even crumbs of connection can feel like a banquet. Eric was kind, respectful, attentive. He was just a nice colleague, or so she thought. Chapter 2. The emotional blind spot. Emotional vulnerability doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't enter the room with red flags waving or alarms blaring. It arrives quietly, almost politely. It wears the face of coincidence, of politeness, of camaraderie. And for Claire Matthews, it wore the smile of Eric Sloan. She hadn't realized how much she looked forward to seeing him. At first, it had just been pleasant, his kindness, his thoughtful way of listening. But over the weeks, something unspoken had begun to grow, watered not by lust, but by attention. Real, present, focused attention. The kind she hadn't felt in years. Claire told herself it was harmless. Everyone enjoyed being seen. G appreciated. Everyone needed a little spark in their day. And if that spark happened to come from a man who wasn't her husband, well, she wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just a compliment here, a joke there. A smile held a second longer than necessary. And then the texts. Short, respectful, always work-related. At least on the surface. "Thanks again for organizing that parent workshop. You really saved the day. Your feedback today made that meeting tolerable. Seriously. Hope you got home dry. This rain's a mess." Nothing inappropriate, nothing she couldn't show David if he ever asked. Except he didn't ask. He never asked. David was still the same, kind, consistent, distracted. His attention lived in spreadsheets, news updates, and the kids' activity calendars. When he did ask about her day, it was a reflex. Claire began to notice her phone more. She kept it near during dinner, during movie nights, on the nightstand instead of tucked in the drawer. Every time the screen lit up, her heart skipped, even when it wasn't Eric. And when it was, just a simple message. Her body lit up with warmth, and her face wore a smile she didn't understand. But Eric knew. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't predatory in the traditional sense. He didn't scheme with wicked intention. But he was experienced, charismatic, sharper than he looked. He knew how to lean just close enough in conversation to create intimacy. He knew how to mirror someone's expressions, how to nod at the right moment, how to compliment without being obvious. His words were never crude. He didn't touch her unnecessarily, and that made it all more disarming, more dangerous. For Claire, it wasn't just about attraction. It was something deeper, the feeling of being seen, understood, treasured, not for being a mother, a wife, a counselor, but just for being Claire. One rainy Thursday afternoon, the storm outside matched the unrest within her. The hallways at school had emptied early. Parents had come to pick up their children in anticipation of road flooding, and most teachers had scattered by 2 p.m. But Claire stayed behind to finish paperwork. Eric did too. The staff lounge was dim, lit only by the gray daylight leaking through the windows. He was there when she entered, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee and staring at his phone. "Rough day?" she asked, startled to find him alone. He looked up, offered her a tired smile. "Breakup stuff. You ever get tired of being the grown-up in someone else's mess?" She chuckled softly, pulling out a chair across from him. "You have no idea." They spoke casually at first, about students, the rain, the vending machine's latest betrayal. But soon, his tone deepened. "She said I was too closed off," he admitted. "Too calculated. Maybe she's right. I just don't like giving people power over my emotions." Claire stirred her tea. "That's not cold. That's survival." Eric looked at her with something softer than admiration. "You get it. Most people don't." Silence stretched between them, charged but comfortable. Then, without thinking, Claire reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Just briefly, just instinctively, a reflex of compassion. Their eyes locked. Her fingers tingled. His hand didn't move away. And then she pulled back, fast, embarrassed. Her chest tightened with panic, her mind suddenly racing. "Sorry," she said, fumbling for her mug. Eric shook his head. "No need. I'm glad you did." The words were gentle, but they thundered in her ears. That night, Claire lay in bed long after David had fallen asleep. The ceiling above her felt vast and hollow. Guilt was a heavy blanket around her shoulders, suffocating in its silence. She hadn't done anything, not really. No lines had been crossed, no promises broken. But in the deepest corner of her mind, something whispered, "You wanted to. Not to cheat, not to destroy, but to feel again. To feel seen, desired, important." She turned onto her side and stared at her husband's back. David breathed steadily, unaware that his wife was drifting toward another man, not in flesh, but in spirit. She tried to remember the last time he had touched her with intention, the last time he'd looked at her as if she were more than a co-parent or roommate. She couldn't. The ache in her chest returned. Emotional betrayal doesn't begin with physicality. It begins in the silence between two people who once knew each other. In the unanswered questions, the missed glances, the weight of years without meaningful connection. It begins with loneliness, so subtle it feels normal. And Eric? he was no longer harmless. He had become the symbol of what Claire had been starving for: attention without expectation, intimacy without responsibility, the thrill of newness without the burdens of history. He hadn't kissed her. He hadn't even hugged her, but he had made her feel alive. And in a world where routine had become her cage, that was the most dangerous temptation of all. The next day at work, Claire couldn't look him in the eye. She busied herself with tasks that didn't need doing. She avoided the staff lounge. She skipped lunch. And when Eric caught her alone near the copier, she gave him the tightest smile she could manage and left without speaking. She told herself she was reclaiming boundaries. She told herself she was doing the right thing. But deep down, she missed the way he looked at her. She missed the version of herself that existed in his presence, and that terrified her. Chapter 3: The Mirror Cracks. The real turning point wasn't a kiss or a confession. It was a message, one that David accidentally saw while borrowing Claire's phone. It wasn't explicit. Just a, "Thanks for being you. Today would have been rough without your support." But it was enough to raise questions. The confrontation was quiet, tense. David didn't yell. He just asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" Claire broke down. Everything came out. The emotional drought, the loneliness, the feeling of invisibility. David listened, stunned. He hadn't realized how far they'd drifted, how much Claire had been suppressing. For years, he assumed silence meant peace, but it was merely resignation. Eric was removed from the equation. Claire transferred schools, but the damage, though not physical, left a lasting mark. It took months of counseling, difficult conversations, and a complete restructuring of their marriage for Claire and David to begin rebuilding. They weren't the same people they were at the altar, and they never would be again. But that was the point. The truth? Married women aren't easy prey because they're weak. They're vulnerable because they've given so much of themselves to others that they sometimes forget who they are. And when someone offers them a glimpse of their forgotten self, it can feel intoxicating. But awareness is power, and Claire's story is a mirror for many others, a reminder that emotional neglect, no matter how subtle, can have deep consequences. End of story.